Alright, good morning. This is for 5th grade ELA. Our read aloud goal is to identify the author's purpose in writing The Lion Who Stole My Arm. So we're going to understand why this author wrote this book. If it was to persuade, to inform, or to entertain. Okay? We are going to be reading this book for 3 days. So there's going to be a part 1, part 2, part 3. This book is about a boy named Pedro who lives in a village in Mozambique, a country in Africa. The genre is realistic fiction, which means the story is made up but true to life. Life in Mozambique, that is. What do you know or imagine about life in Africa in an African village? The book is going to take us into an unfamiliar world. We don't know what challenges await Pedro there, but the title gives us a clue. Let's read The Lion Who Stole My Arm by Nicola Davies. Okay. Chapter 1. Pedro had been fishing with his best friend Samuel and Samuel's big brother Enzi. They had chosen a spot where the river rushed over rocks and was clear enough to see fish underwater, and shallow enough to keep them safe from crocodiles. They'd ridden the currents between the boulders, and chased fish in a net stretched between their hands. Sometimes holding fish in their mouths between two hands were not enough to hold on to their nets and their catch. If I had a mouth as big as yours, Pedro teased Enzi, I'd had twice as many fish. Enzi grinned, showing just how wide his mouth could stretch. I think I could swallow a crocodile, he declared. My mouth is small, said Samuel, and I still caught more fish than you, Pedro. By the time the boys had tied their fish onto sticks to carry home, the sun was already dipping behind the trees. We're going to have to hurry, Pedro said. The others nodded. They knew it was a long way back and it could be dark before they reached the village. Of course, they were brave boys and not afraid of their dangers of nighttime in the bush. The hippos grazing on the bank that will bite you and chew if you disturb their supper. The leopards and lions stalking you, quieter than breath. The hyenas that will crack your bones. The crocodiles that will drag you under the water. No. What worried the boys much more was how angry their mothers would be if they were late getting back. So they hurried along the path and didn't speak until they saw the tops of the village huts over the tall grass. We're late, said Samuel. I can smell the cooking fires already. Don't worry, Enzi replied, putting his hand on his brother's shoulder. We've caught so many fish that Mama will be too busy cooking to be angry. Enzi was right. He and Samuel had caught more than 30 fish between them. Pedro looked at the fish on his stick. 10 small fish were not going to keep him out of trouble for getting home late, but 10 fish and a fat guinea fowl might. Pedro stopped walking. You go, he told his friends. I'm going to see if my snars have caught anything. Before the brothers had time to remind their friend that dusk is not a good time to be creeping around in the long bush on your own, Pedro was gone. Something had gotten to the snares before him. Freshly scattered guinea fowl feathers dotted the clearing. Whatever had eaten the birds could still be close by. Pedro scanned the ground for tracks. There, framed by the crisscross of bird feet, was a single print. 4 oval toes, arranged like petals, around a central pad with no claw marks. Cat, big cat, leopard, he told himself. A leopard that would take the birds from the snares and slip away. Not a lion that might be waiting here for a bigger meal. The hair on Pedro's neck stood on end, and his heart pounded. Run, run! He must run away right now. He streaked through the grass and bushes, ignoring the thorns that tore at his skin. Sweating and panting, he reached the path. With the sound of voices up ahead and the smell of fires, he leaned on his knees to catch his breath, laughing a little at himself for being so scared, relieved at being safe again. Thwack! Pedro's legs were punched from under him. His body hit the ground and the air was knocked out of his lungs. For a moment he didn't hear or see anything. When his eyes and ears worked again, he found he was being dragged along on his back by his outstretched right arm. He twisted around to see what could be holding him, and he looked straight into the face of a lion. He went numb. Time slowed down. Sounds drained from the world, leaving a bowl of silence with Pedro and the lion at the bottom of it. Pedro stared at the lion. It was so close that even in the fading light he could see the spotted lines on his snout, where its whiskers sprouted, the deep notch on his left ear, and the scraggy tufts of mane on his neck. He could smell its breath, hot and meaty, and feel where its teeth had pierced his arm and brushed the bone, although he was too afraid to feel any pain. The lion was bumping his body back along the path, dragging him into the long grass, and as soon as it feels safe hidden in the bush, Pedro said to himself, "It will eat me." Suddenly he stopped feeling numb and started to be very angry. This lion was not going to put an end to him. His stick with the fish still tied on it was gripped in his left hand. He swung it with all his strength and hit the lion hard on the head. He felt the blow strike, and when he looked at the lion, it had a cut between its ears. Pedro hit it again, and for a moment it looked right at him, its golden eyes hot like the sun. Then it snarled and ran away, and Pedro saw that it had taken his arm. Oh, Lord. Chapter 2. Pedro woke up in the hospital, or rather outside the hospital, on the porch in the back, because all the beds inside were full. Pedro's father, Isa, was sitting beside him, fanning away the flies with an old newspaper. "How did I get here?" Pedro asked. His father smiled. "I put you on my back and cycled like a crazy man." It was 10 miles over dirt roads from the village to the clinic at Madun. Even for Pedro's father, the best hunter in the village, probably in all of Africa, that was quite a feat. Isa put down the newspaper and placed his big hand on the top of Pedro's head. "Now, my son," he asked gently, "tell me, how do you feel?" Isa had always told Pedro never to answer any questions without thinking first. So Pedro thought hard about his answer. He turned his head and looked to his right. Where his arm had been was a bandage stump, like a white stick, ending just above where the elbow had been. For a moment Pedro's head swam and he shut his eyes, and when he opened them again, the arm was still gone. It hurt badly where the doctor had sewn up the wound the lion had left, but Pedro knew that it would stop hurting in time. The other pain, however, would not go away so easily. "I'm scared," he told his father. "Scared that I won't be myself anymore. I'll just be the boy with one arm." Pedro tried hard not to cry and went on, "And a boy with one arm can never be strong and be a hunter like you." Isa listened carefully, his brow a mass of creases as he took in Pedro's words. It was a few moments before he spoke. "Pedro," he said, "tell me what you can see and hear." "The holes in the roof," Pedro answered. "Children crying, grown-ups whispering." "No, not here in the clinic," Isa said. "Out there," Isa pointed, beyond the porch to the patch of grass and trees where the town of Madun ended and the brush began again. Pedro propped himself up on his good arm and looked and listened. He'd always been proud of his sharp eyes and ears, and Isa had taught him to know every bird and beast in the bush. It was a comfort now to look out into the trees and sky, so lovely in the first light of day. Pedro found that his eyes snatched up every detail, like a hungry guinea fowl pecking corn. There are 5 barbacas in the top of that dead tree, and a flock of zombritos in the tree next to it. There's an eagle, too, far off, just a speck in the sky. A fish eagle, I think. "Good," he said. "Isa, go on." Pedro shut his eyes and let the sounds trickle in, as clear as the first rains after the dry season. A mad, twittering sound and a low curr, curr, curr. "Palm swifts and a turco calling," he reported, and then he heard another sound, a sweet see, almost too high for human ears. "And sunbirds," Pedro smiled and opened his eyes. His father was standing beside him. "So," Isa said, "the finest tools of the hunter, your eyes and your ears, are still working. Now hold tight, Pedro." Isa scooped up the ends of Pedro's sheet like a hammock and lifted his son high in the air. Pedro laughed and looked down at his father. He held him high and steady with just one hand. "Remember, Pedro," Isa said, "you don't need 2 arms to be strong." Chapter 3. While Pedro waited for his arm to heal enough for him to go home, he tried to remember what his father had said. He willed away the hours in the clinic by teaching himself to tie knots one-handed and how to carry objects. by clamping them between his body and his stump, but sometimes all the things he couldn't do anymore, like climb trees or go fishing, crowded in on him. That's when he thought about the lion who had stolen his arm, about its hot breath and its wicked, fiery eyes. It was his lion now, and he spoke to it fiercely in his head. "One day, lion," he told it, "one day soon I will come and get you." He was desperate to get back to the village, afraid his father might hunt the lion without him, but his arm healed fast, and in a few days he was home. Pedro wanted to pick up his spear and bedroll and set off at once to hunt his lion, but that wasn't how it turned out. Everybody made a big fuss over him. Sure, his mother, Aloud, hugged him so tightly that he thought his other arm might break. His two little sisters, Zibi and Aji, climbed all over him, asking questions until Isa told them to stop. The whole village came by to take a look at him, prodded and poked him like a goat roasting on the fire, and then talked and talked about lions over his head. Mr. Ingwa's cousin had been killed by one just a couple of rainy seasons ago. He went out to chase bush pigs from his crops, Mr. Ingwa said, shaking his head, and he never came back. Mama Remina had been cycling home one day, and a lioness and her cub had chased her down the road. She was so close, Mama Remina said, fanning her face at the memory of her escape, but I pedaled too quick for her. Most horrible of all was Mama Logo's story. When she was little, a lion had burst through the straw roof of her parents' hut and taken her brother. It was a long time ago now, and still Mama Lago shed tears whenever she spoke about it. Everyone agreed that lions were very, very bad. Leopards and hyenas would take your goats, and chickens and crocodiles would take your leg, but somehow that was just a part of the way things were. Like the rains and the sun, lions were different. Lions made people afraid and angry, and now there was Pedro's lion, which might come back and take a person for its dinner. The whole village buzzed with worry. Pedro sat still, listening, wanting all the talk. Stop. So let me go back to page 13 because I stopped. Pedro says it's his lion now. What does he mean? Good man. Thank you. So what does it mean to be his lion? What does he mean by that? He wanted some action instead, and he hoped that he would get in when old Mr. Mazik, the village headman, came along. His voice was like dry leaves rustling in a wind, so soft that people had to lean in close to hear him. Isa Bublaki is our finest hunter, Mr. Mazaki announced quietly. If this lion must be killed to keep our village safe, he will be the man for the task. Everyone nodded gravely at Pedro's father. They all knew it was a great and dangerous duty to hunt a lion. What is your opinion, Isa Bublika? Mr. Mazik went on. Should this lion be hunted and killed? Pedro's heart leaped. His father would hunt the lion, and Pedro would go with him. But Isa shook his head. I followed the creature's tracks, he said. They led far away from the village. It did not come back. I searched for 2 whole days and found no sign. There were exclamations of relief all around, but Mr. Mazik held up his hand. We must remain vigilant, he said. No, not even a skilled tracker such as Isa Bublaka can predict what a lion may do. But I think for now there is nothing to be gained from a little lion hunt. And that was that. There would be no lion hunt. Everyone knew the rains were coming, and soon there would be lots of work to do in the fields. There just wasn't time to hunt a lion who had stolen the arm of an unimportant little boy. Pedro tried to swallow his disappointment, but it stuck fast in his throat, like a big lump of gristle. He went to bed without speaking to anyone. When he lay down to sleep, he pursued the lion through his dreams. I'm going to stop there, and I want to go back just a quick second to show you. It's got these, it's kind of tilted, and it's italicized, and that means that down here it tells you the definitions of what these animals are. Okay? So we're going to stop there.